AFC coalition administration of a 1 to 6% increase in wages and salaries for public servants. The parties also take note of the GPSU's holding position on the final offer. Quite surprisingly, the announcement, in keeping with convention, was not done jointly between the government and the union. On the contrary, while there appears to have been, quote unquote, an agreement to jointly announce the said agreement, because the union did not support the increases, government went ahead unilaterally to announce its final offer, while the union claimed that it will meet at a later date to consider government's final offer. Knowing the track record of the Guyana Public Service Union, it will most likely go along with the government's final offer on the basis of some lame excuse, and this will no doubt be tantamount to another betrayal of the workers' interests. The GPSU must come clean, and in the interest of transparency and accountability, explain to its members the true state of affairs in respect to the outcome of the negotiations and how the final offer was arrived at. The party calls on the Granger administration to explain to the nation what is the total cost of the 1 to 6% increase, having regard to the public boast by Prime Minister Nagamutu, who, at the 2016 May Day rally, declared that government had set aside $43.8 billion and $6.63 billion in benefits and allowances in the 2016 budget as increases in wages and salaries for public servants. Moreover, the question that is to be asked is whether government's final offer is reflective of the 20% increase that was promised to public servants in the APNU AFC 2015 manifesto. Further, in his 2016 May Day address to workers, Nagamutu had also promised incentives, scholarships, land, housing, and recreation to public servants who, he said, quote, must be treated as human beings, end of quote. Observers have queried whether the 1 to 6% increase is adequate for a human being in the public service. In the meantime, quote, enforcing the principles and laws governing collective bargaining as reflective in the APNU AFC 2015 manifesto remains another empty promise by the Granger administration. In addition, the government had promised to, quote, increase the salaries of all government workers on a graduated basis, with the lowest paid receiving a 10% rise, end of quote. Now, the lowest paid public servant will be receiving a mere 6% salary increase according to the agreement reached. This is yet another blow to government workers, and it comes as a stark reminder of the humongous increase in salaries by 50% to cabinet ministers. Notwithstanding all the talk about the need to keep a watch on current spending, the government has been spending millions on junkets abroad for government ministers. In respect of the report of the Commission inquiry into the public service, President Granger had stated, quote, many people had expected that there is going to be a bonanza. I hope they discover that the bonanza will come from their own efforts. If they want to be lazy, they will get a lazy salary. If they want to work hard, they will be rewarded. This could be considered shades of the infamous statement by Forbes Burnham I have nothing to promise but hard work. No one said anything about that statement when it was made. Mr. Granger got away with it scotch-free. But Mr. Granger also pointed out, quote, once we get the report, we will draw some equivalence to the police, defense forces with positions in the public service so that they are related. However, in a recent public statement contradicting President Granger, Ramjathan had stated, quote, it is very difficult at this stage to increase salaries. The minute you start increasing policemen's salaries, the nurses are going to jump on our backs, public servants will go, the teachers will want increases, end of quote. The whole sordid affair of salary increases under the Granger administration is clearly another manifestation of meat for the boys, bones for the workers. The next statement reads as follows. The People's Progressive Party notes the report in a section of the media stating, quote, tax-free overtime for bauxite workers, end of quote. The party wishes to state that Rusal is a privately owned bauxite company. Therefore, the question now being asked is, since this appears to be the new ethos of the Granger administration, they must say whether this concession will be extended to other workers in the private sector. The party supports any approach that will enhance the economic and financial well-being of the working people of Guyana. The party wishes to point out that when the bauxite industry was publicly owned, bauxite workers enjoyed tax-free overtime. However, sugar workers never enjoyed the concession, even though at the time the sugar industry was publicly owned and continues to be publicly owned to this day. The PPP is of the view that tax-free overtime should be granted across the board without discrimination, and sugar workers should be no exception. The party calls on the Granger administration to extend similar concessions to all workers in order to bring some relief to their sufferings, which has become increasingly unbearable ever since the assumption to office by the APNU-AFC coalition administration. The final statement reads as follows. The PPP is following with deep interest the ongoing trial of trumped-up charges filed against one of its leaders, Dr. Barry Ramsaran, at the Wim Magistrate Court. Dr. Ramsaran was charged with uttering insulting language to an individual who was not present when the alleged insulting words were said to have been uttered. In fact, it was Dr. Ramsaran who called in aid the police to protect him against certain verbal abuses which were being hurled at him. From being a victim, Dr. Ramsaran has become the villain. We recall the concocted, contrived, and unfounded private criminal charge instituted by a busybody against former President Bharat Jagdeo. In the same vein, Mr. Jagdeo was denouncing racism, but ended up being charged with making racial remarks. Although this was a private criminal summary offense charge, Mr. Jagdeo was ordered to lodge his passport with the court, thereby losing his fundamental right and freedom to depart Guyana, guaranteed to him by the Constitution. It is well known that persons charged with serious indictable offenses by the state are not usually required, save in exceptional circumstances, to lodge their passport with the court before which their charge is pending. A High Court judge subsequently quashed this said private criminal charge on the ground that it was unfounded and without basis. We are aware that in Dr. Ramsaran's trial, every legal submission made by a battery of lawyers to the self-same magistrate has been overruled by the learned magistrate. In recognition and deference to the sub judice principle, we will say no more. Needless to say, our expectation is for the rule of law to prevail. Thank you. Questions on the statements?
Good morning, Mr. Roy, Board mostly your source. With regards to the public servants' wages increase, you would recall that under your government, they would usually get around the same 5%. So I'm trying to figure out what's the party's beef with what is now being offered.
Well, that 5% that was granted from time to time was done after a whole range of discussions and negotiations. Now, we must recall also that we must see the increases that was granted by the PVPC government administration, together with a whole host of other concessions that were granted, duty-free concessions for motor vehicles, land, house lots, and things like that, easy loans, the Because We Care program. In other words, there were a whole set of other concessions that were granted to workers in order to cushion whatever. Plus, every year they would get this big bonus increase. So I think it was a much better deal that they got under the PPP. And then, remember, this is a commission of inquiry that was set up. The government was taking the position that it is only after the report on the Commission of Inquiry to the Public Service is released, then they will consider increases. Now we're seeing the increases being granted on a scale of 1 to 6, where even the union is considering, rejecting it. But we have to wait until, the final position is stated.
Mr. Roy, Hamlet on Connecting News, just trying to clarify what you heard. Is it 5 or is it really not 10? Because I think your 10% increase that is the highest.
No, I heard 1 to 6. Any other questions? If not, of the statement.
With regards to your party's Congress,
Uh-huh.
has a date been set for that Congress? Do you know when it will be, or
Yes, a date has been set. I think it was announced
was it not?
from the 17th to the 19th of December.
And could you say if you found the replacement just yet for Mr. Ramson?
No, that matter is still being actively considered. We hope that we'll be able to finalize that soon. Any other questions?
So I want to pick your brain as the former Minister of Home Affairs. Which regard, I know you were speaking up about the review of license, gun license. There were several instances during your time in office when there were reports of license being sold from the police and so. So don't you think the right thing to do in order to track all of those persons who may be walking around with license that they bought, not have been eligible for, don't you think the right thing to do would be to just go back through the list and check everybody who would have been giving those licenses?
Well, how would you be able to establish who bought and who went through the normal process? Where would...
A broad review would be adequate, though.
Well, I said before, I am not against any revocation based on what the Firearm License act that was amended calls for. I've always supported that. But, for example, how do you know, how would someone know that a person bought his driver's license? You wouldn't know that unless the person is a reckless driver. And even those with a driver's license, speed, drive recklessly, are unattentive, don't observe the 5 or the 4 C's. So how would we know that a person bought a firearm license or paid to get it when the paperwork is there? So we have to be extremely careful that you don't end up in a Peter pay for Paul and Paul pay for all situation. You have to, be careful with that. Because I'm always very, reserved about these clean sweeps in order to correct situation. I said, I'm sorry to be saying it again, one swallow doesn't make a summer. I mean, I have seen a number of cases where, like the recent one, where a man drove into someone's entrance and the owner of the building opened fire on him. I couldn't understand that. The explanation given was that he thought it was someone who had threatened him and who was coming after him. But once you have in your possession a firearm, a gun, you use it only when you know that you are in physical danger. The moment you use that weapon irresponsibly, or you lose it irresponsibly, the police reserve the right to seize that firearm, lodge it, and then you will be approached subsequently by them, informing you about their intention to seize the firearm permanently, and that you must give reasons why you think that should not happen. So I've always said to people when they've applied for these firearms that, look, it's easy to get it. But when the police get possession of it, it's hard to get it back from them. So the way in which this matter ought to be done is, for example, when the people go to renew the firearm licenses, a review could be made based on the database which I suppose that they have. Because remember, firearm license was issued long before the PPC got into the government. How far are they going back? Or how far back are they going? And are the records as well kept as they were up to the time when I left Home Affairs? Now, the police have records. Home Affairs, under the Firearm License Approval Board, has records too. The two records are supposed to match each other seamlessly. But there are times when the police would grant a firearm license without deference to the Firearm License Approval Board, because they have the form which is signed up indicating that your application has been approved. The Ministry of Home Affairs at the time, the Firearm License Approval Board, does not possess that form that is sent to an applicant notifying him or her that their license or their application has been approved. That form is usually with the Guyana Police Force. So, yes, maybe something needs to be done, but I think, like drivers on the road, they ought to proceed with caution.
Mr. Roy, I know in the past, leading up to the PNC Congress, you did say that as a major political player, that attention would be paid to the Congress. Is there anything noteworthy from the People's Progressive Party's standpoint that would have emanated from that conference?
There are a couple of things which I saw in the press, but you know, I don't want to always go according to what is in the press, because sometimes, you know, people could be misquoted, people could be taken out of context, and so forth. So I would prefer until such time that I lay my hands on a copy, or copies of all the statements and all the speeches that were made at the Congress, for me to pronounce authoritatively on what was said compared to what was not said. But to go according to what was in the newspapers, I'm not so sure I would want to do that. I mean, it could be done, but I may end up being inaccurate sometimes. Any other? Good. Thank you very much.